Welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Mary Elizabeth Williams. You know, women are currently earning more graduate degrees than their male counterparts. Their participation in the labor force keeps rising, and yet we still face, as we learned just recently on Equal Pay Day, a significant wage gap. Fewer opportunities for advancement and mentorship than anywhere near on par with our male colleagues. So now, 23 years after her best-selling Why Good Girls Don't Get Ahead But Gutsy Girls Do, Kate White is back to help us again. We sent out the bat signal and she has returned to us with the Gutsy Girl Handbook. Kate is the former editor of 5 major magazines, including Cosmopolitan. She's written a dozen mystery novels. She's a frequent public speaker. If anybody knows about how to hustle, it's this woman. Hi, welcome,
Hi.
Kate.
Thank you.
So I want to start by asking, there is a generation of women now entering the workforce who weren't even born when the first version of this came out. What has changed for them? What is different for them than the generation you were writing to for the first book?
Well, first of all, there's just so many more opportunities, and you have all these role models too. When I was first starting out, people sometimes talk about Eleanor Roosevelt. That's about all you had to think about. And now you just see so many women doing fabulous things. But still, there are these hurdles we face. And I think that facing up to that, it's got to come from two sides. It's got to come from our society and the workplace. But I still feel women need to be gutsier in how they approach their work and their careers.
And I want to ask you about that because you talk so much about the way you go step by step in the ways that we can do this. And for so many of us, we have internalized this. I can't make too much noise. I have to qualify everything. I have to say please in my emails. I have to put an exclamation point on my declarative sentences so that I seem friendlier and nicer and less intimidating. And yet, we also know, and we've certainly seen in particular over the past year or so, that there are consequences for women who are gutsy, that there can be retaliation for women who are gutsy in the workforce, that women who speak their minds are not always rewarded. In fact, sometimes they are punished. How do we balance that?
I think you don't know until you try it. And what I found is almost always being gutsy won the day. Look, if you're in a terrible situation with a guy who's harassing you and you're speaking out, that could boomerang for you and just create problems for you. But I think in ordinary situations like negotiating for a starting salary, yeah, the person's going to get a little annoyed if you don't take the offer, but if they really want you and you negotiate in the right way, that basically shows that you want to work there, but you were hoping for this amount, they're going to get over that irritation. And that's how I felt about the women who were gutsier for me. Sometimes they might work my last nerve when they were lobbying for a bigger raise, but when they were great, I let that go. And I think we have to be willing to test the waters, because if we don't, we're never going to find out.
Right. I think that's a really important part that for a lot of us, and I've been in the workforce a long time, and I include myself in this, we still psych ourselves out of opportunities.
Yeah, it's so true. We know today there's a lot of information about how important it is to ask. But then the studies show that women are less likely to negotiate their starting salaries than guys are. And I think it's just exactly what you said. We know it's important to ask, but because it makes us so uncomfortable, we come up with excuses like, well, it's a good enough offer, I don't want to rock the boat and start off on the wrong foot. I think it's also important to realize that sometimes you do have to ask for things guys don't have to ask for. I saw a study the other day that said that men are 20% more likely to be given the kind of glamour jobs within their jobs that lead to promotion, like running a new team or representing the company at an industry event. But because that's the way it plays out, you've got to raise your hand for those sorts of things. You've got to ask not just for money, but for opportunities, something to get you out of your comfort zone, set you apart from the pack.
Right, and that's a really important part, because when we're talking about negotiating, we're not just talking about money. We're not just talking about salary.
Right.
And you go through a whole list of other things you can ask for. So particularly if they say they're kind of firm on the money, well then, but I want to make sure I want this.
Yeah, and even if they're not firm on the money, even if they say, okay, yeah, we're going to give you more, often there are things that they were only going to give you if you ask for them. It might be tuition reimbursement, it might be extra time off, and that's often easy to get. And I always gave anyone who came to work for me and been in the workforce for a while, even though our policy was that they started with 2 weeks vacation, I always gave them 3, one under the table. Because I thought it's not fair to be bringing in some 31-year-old and tell her suddenly you got to go back to 2 weeks. It was very easy for me to do. No one in the company knew I was doing it, and so that's often an easy thing to get. So try to do some research, ask people you know in the field, what sorts of things might I be able to ask for here, and start making a list and go in there prepared to, as the discussion evolves, let's say you've settled on a good amount, you're happy with the salary, then you can just say nicely, look, there are a couple of other things I'd like to talk to you about.
It's always good to find out what are the off-the-menu specials,
right?
Basically.
And you know what's also critical is what's your job really going to involve? Will you have an assistant? What's your budget going to be? Do you have the right to hire from the outside and make changes? I know women who've gone in without getting all that nailed down and discover that's not exactly what they thought it was going to be.
Right. Make sure you're getting what you were promised.
Right.
And another thing that you talk about is going big and going ballsy,
right.
And that's really, really important. Really important, because a lot of us, again, we feel psyched out. We feel talked over. We're going to talk about the mansplaining when we do present our ideas, and we feel that the consequences, if we fail or if something isn't not even fails, but if it isn't as big a hit or a success, are greater for us.
Yeah, there's a lot being said today about the importance of grit and hard work, but when I look at my achievements and those of so many successful people, it comes down to going big or going home. You have to do more than you're told to do. You have to come up with ideas that are bold and innovative and possibly disruptive for your department, ideas that maybe drive profitability, create buzz, and really make your boss say, wow, that make your boss say, I like that, go do it. And if you haven't heard your boss say that in a while, you need to step back and say, what's going on here? I used to use this thing at Cosmo I called the 4 Bs, where I would say with everything, hey, could this be better? Could it be bigger? Could it be bolder? Could it even be more badass? Because the breakthrough ideas break the rules, and sometimes it's not even us just being ungutsy that makes us not go there. We get busy and we do things the way they've always been done before, and it's really important to step back. And one great thing about Cosmo is that it had to be over the top. So I had a little note in my desk drawer that said, what have you done to break the law today? And if the answer was nothing, I knew I better think fast.
You know, I'm glad you brought up Cosmo. I was going to save this question, but speaking of Cosmo breaking all of the rules, I'm really curious what you think about Walmart's decision last month to move Cosmo from the checkout racks, saying that it's exploitive of women.
Yeah, you know what? I actually think, probably knowing what I know about the collapse of newsstand for magazines, when I was at Cosmo, we were selling over 2 million copies a month, and our sell-through at Walmart was 85%, or between 80 and 85%. They're not going to move you from the checkout with numbers like that. But print newsstand has declined, and I suspect it's very much a business decision. That's just my gut. But the idea that you are tying this with the Me Too movement and sexual harassment, Cosmo was all about, and I think my number 2, who's running it now, I think has done a fantastic job. It's about empowering women to take control of their sexual relationships and not only learn about pleasing a man, but educating him to please you. And it's so powerful. Sex is such an important part of our relationships, and you want to know how to do it well, just as we want to know how to be good parents and be good at our careers. I think it's just terrible for it to be tied to exploiting women, because it is not about that at all. It's really about empowerment.
Yeah, I was a Cosmo reader as a teenager, and it was not just where I got a lot of my sex education, but also where I got a lot of my education about how to enter the workforce. It's always been an advocate for women professionally as well as personally, and a lot of that also comes from your direction. It's always been a big part of the mission.
Yes, and the only people who think Cosmo isn't that are the people who are totally in the dark, who don't read it. The women who read Cosmo love that magazine. I edited 5 major magazines, and I worked for others. I never saw a reader who loved a magazine more than the Cosmo reader.
Yeah, because it's a distinct kind of readership, and it really always has singled itself out in the pack with its identity. So getting back to being gutsy, all this is about gutsy women. One of the things that I noticed has changed in this edition of the book is there are some new, not concepts, but new words for certain concepts that have entered into our language, including your side hustle. We're going to talk about your side hustle. We've all been side hustling for years, but we didn't call it a side hustle.
We called it the Plan B, right?
We called it Plan B. You talk about the glass cliff.
Right.
I want to ask you about that, but first I want to ask you about a problem that has plagued women, working women, for generations: the mansplain.
Oh, yeah.
What do we do when we come up against it in our professional lives?
Wow, I got it when I was at Cosmo. I remember there was this one guy when we were in the sort of corporate meetings, and he was a numbers guy, and he just would love to sort of explain things about the Cosmo website based on what he knew about how people used websites versus print. And finally, you just have to say it in diplomatic terms. I would say that's not what we are finding with our research. The same type of woman is reading the website who's reading the magazine, and there is a difference, and we have to be careful about not giving away the print edition on the website. And you just have to come out and do it. And unfortunately, you got to be, even though you feel entitled to say, shut the F up, you have to be diplomatic. I think just as annoying is interrupting. There was a study a couple of years ago about how women on the Supreme Court are interrupted by the male justices significantly more than they interrupt the other guys. And for that, in the book, I got a great tip from someone who said, when a guy goes to interrupt you at a meeting, you just raise your hand and you say, "Excuse me, I'm just about to finish here, and I'll be glad to turn the floor over to you when I'm done. I just need 1 more minute."
Reclaiming my time.
Yes, yeah.
Reclaiming my time.
Right.
So I want you also to talk about the glass cliff, because that is a concept I hadn't heard before, but obviously has also existed.
Yeah, that was a term coined by a couple of women academics in the UK, but research has supported it in the US, that sometimes women get big jobs in companies when there's trouble, when a department or even the whole company might seem like at death's door. And then you've got to evaluate, there's a good chance of failure. And with that, you really have to step back and say, do I have a good safety net here? Do I have a severance package? Could I use this to segue into something else? How much is it going to damage me if this goes downhill? And really see if there's enough there that you could salvage it, that it will be good for you. And maybe in some cases you say, look, this is going to be a no-win situation for me, and pass it up.
And you talk a lot about how this is so important. You have to keep reinventing yourself at every stage of your career. And you take the reader through basically going from an intern to being a boss, and what you need to do every single step of the way. So can you give me an example of either a lot of them in the book, but maybe one of your favorites of someone who's applied some of these, or someone you've learned these techniques from?
Oh, that I've learned them from.
Yeah, there are so many great women that you cite in this book.
Yes. I guess I've really loved looking at the women who face terrible setbacks in their careers and really step back and say, this was, you know, kind of a trauma for me, but how can I reinvent myself from it? One of my actual favorite stories, though, is a woman. I just saw that Google alert. There was a woman in the UK who mentioned me. She's an MP, a feisty MP, and the Google alert was from the Scottish Herald. I thought, wow, what have I done to have my name in the Scotland Herald? But she said that the original book had really shaped her life and led her to run for office one day. But I think all women the smartest women, to me, are the ones who don't hide their head in the sand when they have something bad happen to them in their careers, who really try to look at failure and learn from it. There's some interesting research that shows that high-achieving people often take more credit for their successes, but also less credit for their failures. Because you know you've got your partner, your friends saying, they were idiots to fire you. Come on, no, you were fantastic. But if you can step back and say, what was going on there? Was it politics, or was it me not always taking the bull by the horns? I was thinking actually today of a situation, you know, in my own professional life where I missed out on a job, and someone told me later it was a promotion. It didn't go to you because you were a woman. But it was only years later that I realized I didn't go after it with all the gusto I should have. I handed in a proposal, but I didn't say to the top guy, I want to meet with you, I want to tell you what I can do. I didn't say, tell me what I need to do to get this job. And so I think if you can look at failure and learn from it, it's just so valuable.
And if you're going to go big in your career, you're going to fail more.
Right.
Like that's kind of part of how it goes.
Yeah, and women, we have to get better at accepting that failure is natural, it's normal. Guys do a good job sometimes of reframing it. They leave a meeting where their idea was shot down and they just think, wow, they don't have a clue. And we think, oh, I suck. And we have to not take it personally, see it's part of the learning process.
Absolutely, and part of if you wanna have the big successes, you're
gonna fail at some point.
You gotta throw a lot of spaghetti against the wall,
yeah,
right?
Right.
Kate, thank you so much for coming in today. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. So inspiring. I got to tell you, my 18-year-old was going off to her internship today, and she said, "I'm going to try and make my boss wow today." So there you go. Another Gutsy girl goes out into the world.
Wow.
The book is called The Gutsy Girl Handbook. I've been talking to Kate White. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary Elizabeth.